Have you ever wondered how to craft a good spiritual teaching? Turns out it's not magic. There's a process, and today I'm pulling back the curtain and walking you through my process for putting together spiritual teachings. My name's Sambhava. I'm a Buddhist monk who's been practicing for 16 years, and this more or less follows the process that I go through every time I give a Dharma talk for my Sangha. I hope it's going to help you as you're crafting together your Dharma talk. So I follow roughly a 4-step process, starting with something I call the laboratory phase. And what the laboratory phase is really just a place where I put myself in a low pressure environment to get ideas. So a classic laboratory phase activity is driving in my car. I have a lot of ideas when I'm in the car. Sometimes I'm listening to podcasts. Other times I'm listening to music. Sometimes I'll listen to other spiritual talks, but I'm just looking for things that'll inspire me. And I'm looking for a spark, something that'll just catch my interest. And it doesn't need to be fully formed. Oftentimes when I'm driving to work, I'll have an idea and I'll talk to Siri on my phone and I'll send myself an email with just a couple of words to remind me of that idea. But sometimes when there's an idea that really has a spark, I'll find myself responding to that same email multiple times on my drive. So if I get into work and I have an email and 5 replies because I'm starting to really resonate with an idea and it's giving me more ideas, there's probably something there. Another trick in the laboratory phase, and it makes an appearance in really all parts of the process, is I will use this wonderful app on my phone called Voice Memos. And what a voice memo is on an Apple phone, you hit record and it will just record you talking. So for me, a lot of my ideas become more fleshed out as I speak them. So I have tons of voice memos on my phone. That's me babbling, sometimes incoherently, sometimes very excitedly, sometimes just forcing myself to do it to see what comes out. And it's a way of organizing my thoughts without being very structured about it. So as I talk it out loud, I start to see a theme, a pattern. There's a rhythm that I start to develop with some of the content. And especially if it's an idea that I'm already kind of excited about, sometimes talking it out will really, really flesh it out. There are other activities you can do with this. In the book, The Artist's Way, they talk about an activity called morning pages, where every morning you force yourself when you get up to write 3 pages of handwritten notes. And the only rule is you have to write 3 pages. And it's meant to get through just kind of whatever is in your head and get it out on paper. And I've also found this exercise to be very illustrative to, get ideas out that I didn't maybe know I had until I actually wrote them out. Another activity that I highly recommend that's great for the laboratory stage is I saw this awesome Instagram reel called Wednesday Waffles. And it's a group of friends in Australia. And every Wednesday, they send each other a 1 to 2 minute video just about how their week has been, what they're up to. It's a way of friends to keep in touch with each other. So I started doing this with a number of my friends, including a group of my Buddhist friends. And something very interesting in my Buddhist friends' Wednesday Waffle is that oftentimes something that I'm excited about or noodling on or is starting to come into my awareness, several other people are starting to have a similar experience. So I know if that's the case, where it's not just me, other people are picking up on that frequency, there's probably something to it. So these are just ways, again, low pressure. I'm not even really fully forming something yet, but it's a way to just generate ideas and getting them from the background of my mind into the foreground, which leads me to the outline stage. So now I'm at a point, I think I have something cool. Maybe I want to start to put it together into a talk. So this is where most people honestly get really stuck on the process because they don't go from the idea phase to a concrete outline. So if there's one skill that I recommend that you develop in this whole process, it's actually forcing yourself to go through and give a fully fleshed out outline. And this is something you can practice. Even if it goes nowhere, it doesn't even lead to a talk you're going to give. Just that process of writing things down and having to organize your thoughts, like, okay, I'm interested in this idea. Here's one part I'd talk about, and then a second part, and then a third part. That will help you just get in the mode of finishing and moving from idea to something that's complete. Because once you have something that's complete, even if it's just a couple of bullet points in an outline, suddenly it tricks your brain into thinking that it's a fully formed idea, and you'll start to edit it like a fully formed idea and fill it in. Whereas if you only bring maybe half the outline, a couple of ideas, they don't have any connective tissue yet, it's often very hard to get it over that hump and into something fully formed. So here's a trick that I stole from my bandmates who have a motto, which is first idea, best idea. And first idea, best idea is just whatever's in your head, just force yourself to put it out and finish it. And probably your first idea is going to be a pretty good idea. Now, we'll often edit from there. It's not that our first idea, best idea is the final form, but just having that, giving yourself permission to just first idea, best idea, put it all out there and not putting any restrictions on yourself, I found to be really helpful in just getting it from the unmanifest to the manifest. You have some bullet points, there's an outline. And then once you have an outline, you can start to fill it in, because with any good teaching, you're looking for a couple of key ingredients. Your outline needs to have an introduction. What are you going to be talking about? How are you going to direct the audience's energy? Is there a cool icebreaker that you can use in that? Then I usually want to have no more than 3 to 5 points that I'm going to be talking through in the outline. And so you put 5 bullet points and you fill out what are my 3 to 5 points in the outline. And then you can start to do cool things to fill that in. Maybe one of those points becomes a Buddhist story, and you go find a Buddhist story that is going to resonate with that point in your outline. Maybe another point, you're going to pull from a personal example and you're going to share something from your life. Maybe for another bullet point, you can reference another Dharma talk that you've already heard and bring that into your talk. So there's different places where we find these ingredients and start to make the meal. This is also a phase where I've used AI actually very effectively. Not to write my Dharma talk for me. That usually doesn't work out so well, at least so far. But AI is a really interesting way of thinking about and having a buddy to help you write and think through your ideas. So I have used AI to do things like, hey, I'm working on a Dharma talk for these people in this audience, and here's the points I want to make. Is there a point I may be missing? Is there a way I could frame this better that would be more clear? And sometimes it'll give a really interesting idea that'll take me down a path I didn't originally think about. There's also a wonderful app that I'd recommend trying. It's called Notebook LM. It's a Google product. And what you can do is you can upload any piece of content. It could be written content. It could be your voice memo you took in your car. And it'll upload the content and it will bring you back an AI generated podcast with 2 AI hosts who will talk about your ideas. And it's very interesting to hear someone else talk through your ideas, because even though it's computer generated in AI, the things that they'll pick up on and the point of view will oftentimes be kind of interesting, and it'll take you through a path that you maybe didn't think about before. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but these are just ways, again, you have now an outline, you're starting to generate ideas, and you're starting to actually flesh this out in a way that could become your talk. There's also a really important part that I always start thinking about in the outline phase, which is what's my hook? What's my twist? Every good Dharma talk that I've heard has a moment where you take an idea and then you turn it on its head. So you lead the audience to a place, okay, you're going to talk about compassion, but you give them a dimension of compassion that they weren't expecting. Or there's a story that gives a surprise that makes people think about it in a different way. And it's a way of hooking in your readers. They think they're going one way, and then you just have this little twist that suddenly opens up the dimensions of what you're talking about. So I'll try to identify in my outline phase, what's my hook? What's my twist? Where's the place where I want to flip something on its head? Sometimes that's at the beginning of the talk. Sometimes that's in the middle. Sometimes that's at the end of the talk. Different ways work for different circumstances. But it's something that I like to identify and think about early on and put that into my outline. Which leads me to part 3, which is what I call the pregame. So now we have a fully fleshed out outline. In our Sangha, we have a teaching council that we submit outlines to, and we give a teaching and they give us feedback on our teaching. So I've gone a couple of rounds back and forth. We've helped, flesh out the ideas. They act like an editor, which is nice. And now I do pregame, which is that I have my talk, I have my points, and how do I start to internalize it? Because I can't go up there and read the talk from my phone or read from my notes. So how do I start to internalize these ideas and make them smooth and natural? And again, this is where my friend the phone comes in again, because this is another wonderful use case for voice memos. So I usually have a couple of step process. When I have my actual talk ingredients, I'll oftentimes take an index card and I will write out just the bare bones of my outline on the index card. Not all the points I want to make. I want to intentionally leave it very open to breathe. But I'll write down, my 5 points, my high level arc, what's my twist, just as a couple of reminder words. And again, I'll go to my car, I'll be driving to work, I'll turn on my voice memos, and I'll force myself to just go through the talk, usually 3 times in a row, end to end. So I'll start from the beginning, I will stumble my way through it and make it to the end, take a deep breath, start back at the beginning, and just get comfortable saying all the things out loud and speaking them into existence in the sequence that I want to speak them. And sometimes that will uncover some things because maybe I need to move some things around. A point is better made later than earlier. So, there's still some editing that happens in here, but I already have my points. I already know where I'm going. And this is really to just practice that repetition and getting the words very comfortable in my head. So I have my note card. I have my key points. I have my voice memos. I go through it again. This is also another time I will oftentimes revisit the Notebook LM app because I will speak my Dharma talk into Notebook LM, and then Notebook LM will spit back a podcast and talk about it. And again, sometimes that'll just uncover something. They'll use a word or a word choice or describe something a little differently than I did that will just unlock something. And I'm looking to just smoothly get through the sections. Now, for me, not for everyone, it's very important to actually not write down every single thing I'm going to say in the outline phase. Because if I do that, then I'm just going to start reading my outline. And to me, it comes across as a little robotic. So I like having the fluidity where I break that up a bit and force myself to actually speak it through. And even if I don't have all the points in front of me, I get comfortable just having my little reference bullets that I know they're there if I need them, but I'm not beholden to them and reading off of them. So that leads us to step 4, which is showtime. Now it is the day of the talk. What are we doing? So I'm going to wake up. Oftentimes our Dharma talks are in the morning. So I'm going to wake up a couple hours before the Dharma talk, and I'm going to have a little ritual that I like to follow. I oftentimes like to walk and go get coffee. That's going to get me outside. That's going to get me some vitamin D. My brain's going to get going. I get to experience the crisp morning air, and it just helps settle me and take me out of the sleep phase. I'm also going to have day of a note card written down with my points. So I'm not going to have it in front of me. I'm not going to be looking at it as I'm giving the talk, but I have it on me somewhere so that if the worst case thing happens and I get completely stuck, I don't know what to say, I have something that's pretty subtle that I can look at, remind myself, and then continue the talk. It's generally not good to have it be your phone. Your phone is too obvious and people have too many associations with the phone. So to me, the index card works really well because it's very subtle. I can put it in my pocket. I can look at it if I need something. Sometimes I'll just have it out of sight. And if I just need to glance and remember my point, it's just a way of giving myself some comfort that I'm not going to get totally stuck. So I'll usually do a rehearsal the morning of just to kind of go through. Maybe it's not a full rehearsal, but I'm just looking for like the beats because for me, it's really important to just internalize those beats. Then we go on. Oftentimes for our Dharma talks, there's half an hour before a sound check, and sound check is super important. So this is where I'm going, I'm making sure my lighting's good, I'm making sure that my microphone is good, we know which music's going to play. There's a lot of coordination that happens, and it's great when all that's figured out because then I don't need to worry about anything. I can just focus on my talk and then give my talk. So now I'm in the talk. So I have my outline, I've done my rehearsals, I'm very comfortable at this point giving the talk with just the high level beats. And something that I will endeavor to do in every Dharma talk, not every time, but is really take a moment to breathe. So especially as I transition, I end my first point and I get to my second point. I will sometimes speed up and want to talk faster. So I try to really force myself, moment of, to just breathe and then move on to the next point. It feels like much longer than it actually is. But it helps, especially day up when the energy gets really high, because I get very excited and there's a tension on you and it feels a little bit like you're on stage. There's an energy that happens there that's going to speed you up. So it's just important. Any little trick you have that'll slow you down the day of is usually pretty great. I will also, even if I'm giving a Dharma talk on Zoom, which increasingly I've been doing lately, I will like to have at least one other person in the room with me and have an audience, because it's very difficult to just talk to a camera and make a connection. But if you have at least one person there with you who can be an anchor and giving you feedback, it feels a little bit more like a performance and a little bit less like talking into the void. So I like to have one person, sometimes a small group of people, but just something there that gets the energy of a live talk, even if it's a talk that's primarily on Zoom, I found for me is very helpful. And something that I'll do as I'm giving the talk, I will leave my voice memos running. So I have a copy of my talk. And something that I will often do, which not everyone does, it's a little difficult, is not long after the talk, usually within an hour, I will actually go listen back to the talk while it's still fresh. And I'm doing this for two reasons. One, it's easier to improve when you have some reference and you can hear yourself talk. But I'm not so much looking for that, because what I actually want to do is try to experience my talk from the audience's point of view. When I'm giving it, I'm on stage, I'm performing, there's a way in which I'm experiencing that. But it's very different when you interact with your own talk as a listener. And oftentimes what I'll be doing in, say, the second attention is that as I'm making my points, as a listener, I can almost like reinforce those points from the audience's point of view. It's a very kind of weird thing to talk about, but it's basically you're listening back through your talk. And it's a way of listening selflessly, I guess you could say it. But you're understanding your talk as the audience did, and you're just kind of identifying and helping to clarify energetically those beats that you gave in your talk. And I don't know, maybe this is a placebo, but there's something about that process that for me makes the talk a little bit more sticky, a little bit more resonant. And for me, it also just internalizes it a little bit more. And there's some circuit that closes when you do this. So I recommend you try it. Some people really don't like doing this. It's very uncomfortable for them, but give it a try sometime. You might like it. So those are my 4 steps. We have the laboratory stage, low pressure environment to generate ideas, bounce them off friends. We have the outline stage, and my recommendation is just do it. Just get an outline, force yourself to do it, even if it's just a couple of bullet points, then you can start to fill it in. You have your pregame stage where you're reporting, and for me, voice memos are my best friend. And then you have your showtime where you're in it, you're calm, you're cool, you're relaxed, you're prepared, and you've done the work so that the Dharma can just flow through you. And when you're actually giving that performance, there's not much of you there, right? You're just letting it come through you, and you've done the work. You've given it the structure where now it can just flow. So those are my 4 steps. I wanted to show you real quick how this came together in a recent Dharma talk, so you can actually see this in action. So I'm going to share my screen. So first off, this is Notebook LM. So you get this just by having a Google account. If you go to notebooklm.google.com, and all you do to get started is you upload a source. I'm usually doing an audio file, but you can also do it for Notes app as well. And when you upload a source, it'll give you an option to create a podcast. And that'll create 15, 20 minutes, depending on the content, a podcast that will talk back about the source that you gave it. So interesting, really fun little app. Can't recommend it enough, especially for Dharma talks. So I'll talk about and deconstruct a little bit about a recent talk I gave about a topic on alignment. So this is a talk I gave in January, but it really came over the course of about 3 months to go through each of these stages, because I was in the laboratory phase, and what initiated it is I was on a trip to Mexico. So it was just on vacation, wasn't for a dharmic purpose, but when I was in Mexico, I really started to resonate, you could say, with a set of dimensions. And we had read some books by an author named Carlos Castaneda, pretty controversial author to be honest, but he has some interesting concepts around working with a teacher and some of the mysticism dimensions that he uses that resonate with me. So I read some of his books years ago. I was in Mexico, and there was just something familiar that reminded me of those books. So when I got back from my trip, I read a book called Fire from Within, and it was a book I had never read of his before. Pretty weird all in all, but there was just a couple of pieces in the book that really stuck out to me that were concepts that I was familiar with, but he just talked about them in a little different way. And it was in that book I read the word alignment. And alignment was very interesting to me because it resonated with a dharma that was very present. So in my Sangha, we had a central teacher who retired earlier this year. And our Sangha is in a big transition where instead of having another central teacher, we're actually moving to a multi-teacher model. So this is a very new model for us, and there's a lot of change involved with it. And one of the big things that I was looking for is like, what's a Dharma talk that could really speak to us in this transition? And when I heard the word alignment, there's just something that popped out at me that's like, ooh, yeah, we can use that. And he talks about alignment in the book, and he talks about some of the dimensions of alignment. And I really like that. And there was this twist in the way that he described it, because part of alignment wasn't just like you're on the same page with everyone else. That's what people would think about if they just hear the word alignment. But he actually said there's a dimension of alignment that's internal, that just talks about when you work with a teacher, a mystical teacher, a spiritual teacher, that you have all these experiences that you could say are like imprinted into you. But they're incomplete experiences because there's actually like, you can't grasp all of it at the time that it happened. So there's this part in the book they talk about when a teacher leaves and goes away, then there's this process that you have to take as an individual to actually rediscover your own alignment. And actually you retrace the steps you took with your teacher when you had all these experiences, but you actually now manifest them yourself. So I was like, wow, this is a perfect hook because it's exactly relevant to our current situation. And it's just something that takes these dimensions that I was in Mexico. And I don't know, it was just started clicking. So I had my weekly Wednesday waffle group, and I would tell them, hey, I'm thinking about alignment, and it's really interesting. And there's this part of it. So the idea kind of developed as I spoke it out loud. But at this point, I didn't really have a Dharma talk in mind. So after the winter solstice, we'd just come out. There was a very big, beautiful celebration that we had. Solstices are our big events. And now I'm back in California, and I'm still thinking about alignment. There's just something that really has stayed with me now for 2 months, and I've just been working on it. So I say, okay, now I'm going to move into step 2. Let me force myself to do an outline. So I had the first outline, and the first way I was thinking about it wasn't so much a talk just about alignment. It was more like a BuzzFeed article, like top 5 ways that cool things can help us in our Sangha and where we are in our journey right now. So I was talking about a couple of topics, one of which was alignment, but there was a lot of other things. And I submitted this outline. I felt really good about it. It was a little bit experimental, a little bit different. And I sent it to our teaching council, and I got the feedback back like, this is cool, but there's like 5 different talks in here. So like maybe just focus on some of this, and that would be like a really good talk. So I looked at that, and my second draft, I really picked back up on alignment. I felt like that was my strongest point. I felt like that's where my hook was. And I did a V2 outline, and this is basically what was on my index card. What is alignment? How is it related to where we are now? And here's 3 dimensions of it that in my recent journeys, I wanted to bring to the Sangha and share. So I shared about alignment and mysticism. This is where I talked about the book. I brought in the hook that I learned from the book. So I used my hook at the beginning. I talked about alignment with the process. We're going through an process that has a lot of unfoldment. So just talking about and drawing parallels to ways in which we need to let things unfold. And there's this patience and beauty of letting these things come out. And then I talk about alignment with the Sangha. And in our Sangha, we practice a lot of karma yoga. So spiritual practice through action, through doing things, from doing physical activity in the world. So there's something about that and how we could use this dimension of alignment in our work and our work together. That was sort of my end from there. And then, we had a meditation. We could focus on the dimensions of alignment, and that was essentially the talk. So the last 3 steps, the laboratory stage lasted about 3 months. I went through the last 3 steps in about a week and a half. So from the time I submitted my first outline, I sent it in, I did the edits, and now I've like gone through all these steps. That was actually a very condensed process just at the end, but it's because, and it's kind of like songwriting, honestly. It's just like, if you're constantly in the zone where you're thinking about songs and melodies and coming together and capturing these ideas, then when it comes time to write a song, you have a lot to pull from. But if you don't have the discipline of that practice, it could be a little bit hard, and you might have a little bit of writer's block. So there's one takeaway from this whole talk for me. It's that when you're putting these talks together, it's forcing yourself to jump from the unmanifest to the manifest, and having your aperture really wide on just what you're open to and what comes to you, and making sure you document that somewhere so that you have that bank to pull from. The other thing which I'll show, when I gave the talk, I was on vacation in Seattle. This is actually a picture. So this is a room in an Airbnb. I love to have, for me, especially when I'm giving an online Dharma talk, I like to have an interesting background because I feel like the background and how that presentation works is very important. So we rearranged this whole Airbnb to basically have this amazing golden crest painting. I don't even know what it was actually, but behind me, it looked like a museum. And I rearranged the room. There's actually a whole bed in here that we moved out and made basically a tripod where I had my camera going into my computer. There was a Buddhist statue in the room that was, giving us good vibes here. So this was just a very fun thing because I think there's also something, especially when you're doing a Dharma talk online, like you're communicating much more than the words. And when you can do something fun like this that really puts some extra pizzazz behind your words, I think it just adds to something. And for me, this is a really fun part of the process. So thank you for joining me. This is how I put together a Dharma talk. You might have your own style, and that's great too. And I hope some of these things will be helpful in your process. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a wonderful rest of your night.